it's Meg, and today I'm going to be sharing with you guys my poetry book collection. I'm sure you guys probably know this by now, but in case you didn't, I love poetry, like, a lot, and I have started to gather quite the poetry book collection. So I'm going to share with you guys all of my poetry books, like all of them, which is why my shelf up there is an absolute mess because I have taken them out. I have 29 books, I believe, in total, so I am obviously getting quite the collection, and I have a variety of books from anthologies to writing books to collections and a little bit in between, so this is going to be a really long ass video, so get yourself a cup of tea and some food, some biscuits, some cake, whatever your heart desires, because we are just going to have a lovely little evening chat whilst I talk to you guys and go through all of my poetry books. So without further ado, let's get into the video. I'm going to do this video in stages, so kind of sections, so I'm going to start off with anthologies, which if you guys didn't know, it's kind of like a book that is a collection of poems from different poets, kind of a variety of poets and a variety of poetry. And the first one that I have is I believe my very first poetry book, which is A Ring of Words, which is edited by Roger McGough, and this is an anthology, and this is a children's one, I believe. It must be because I did receive it as a child. And this, my aunt got me this, and if you can't see from the top, I tabbed it quite a lot. This was before the days of when I discovered actual tabs, so there's loads of ripped pieces of paper. But this was probably one of the things that started off my love for poetry, because the poems in here are so wonderful. They are so imaginative and interesting, and there's so many that I love in here. It is a great start. If you are a mum or you have a young person in the family who is maybe looking for a poetry book for your child, I would 100% recommend this. It is so fun, and it's a great read for all ages, to be honest with you. You don't have to be a child to read this. I still flick through it every now and again, but it is just an absolute joy, and I love it to pieces. And there's so many, like there's poems about cats, there's poems about birds, animals, imaginary things, like there's loads. It's just wonderful. So I definitely recommend this, especially for young readers, but obviously for all poets of all ages and poetry readers of all ages. And another anthology that I really enjoy is Staying Alive, Real Poems for Real Times, which is edited by Neil Astley, and I believe this is kind of like an anthology trilogy. There are two other books that do relate to this, two other anthologies. This is the first one, I believe, and I was gifted this by my dad's friend who is also into poetry, which was really nice of him, and I have started reading this. I've definitely not read it all, I'm not even halfway through, but some anthologies like A Ring of Words and some of the other ones that I'm going to talk to you guys about, you can kind of dip in and out of them and read them as you wish. But with ones like Staying Alive, if you read the introduction, it will tell you that you should read it in order, read the poems in order, because there are different sections in this book, from like love and relationships to homeland and war and peace and different things about people and growing up and bittersweet. They're kind of different things in here, and I love this. As you can, I have been tabbing it slowly, and I haven't revisited it in a while because it would take me quite a while to read, but I will get there eventually. And obviously, if you are starting out in poetry, anthologies are really great because it opens you up to a whole different variety of poets and different styles of poetry, and then if you find a certain style or a certain poet that you like, you can maybe investigate that more, maybe read more of their work, which is why they are so wonderful. And I feel like this anthology is especially one of the great places to start, as well as another anthology which is also great for beginners, which is Poetry Please, the Nation's Best Loved Poems, with a foreword by Roger McGough. I think that's how you say his name at any rate. And this is based on a radio programme on BBC4, and I believe it's called Poetry Please, and I've never listened to it, but this is another one that I got for my birthday a good couple of years ago, and this is the sort that you dip in and out of. Again, it has a load of variety of sonnets and different sorts of poetry, and there's some really lovely poems, some more modern ones, some more classic ones, across a whole time expansion. It's just another really great beginner book if you are looking to get into poetry and you don't really know what to go for. And another book obviously similar to those is The Nation's Favourite Poems, and this has a foreword by Griff Rhys-Jones. And this is quite old, I think, so there are some more older, more traditional poems in here. One that I love especially is The Lady of Shalott, which is quite a classic, but it's so beautiful and lyrical. And again, like the other two anthologies that I was talking about, this has a whole variety of poems, which is obviously great also again for beginners. Another anthology that I have is A Poet's Guide to Britain, which is edited by Owen Shears. And this is another anthology, again, like Staying Alive, where you are meant to read this in order. And this is based on a TV series, I believe, that Owen Shears did, who is a poet. And I believe it's about exploring, you know, Britain with poetry, is what I believe. I've never watched it personally, but you are meant to read this in order, and it goes through different categories again, like there's London and cities, and then there's villages and towns, and then there's like islands, mountain and moorland, forest, coast, all that sort of thing. And again, this has a wide variety of poetry. And this is one that I have started, not got very far into, but one that I definitely want to finish. And then another anthology that I have, which is slightly different compared to the other ones, is Answering Back, Living Poets Reply to Poets of the Past, which is edited by Carol Ann Duffy. And Carol Ann Duffy is a very acknowledged and very well loved and well-known poet, UK poet. And I haven't read all of this book, I'm maybe about halfway through. And this is a little different compared to some of the other anthologies that I've talked to you guys about, because it is basically, the idea of it is there are some more traditional poems which are written by more traditional and older poets from past centuries and generations, and new, more modern poets basically write a reply in the form of a poem to the poem of this writer who is probably long gone. And it's really interesting. It has all the different people on the back, and I've not finished it, but from what I have read, it is very interesting and such a fun way to create an anthology and a collection of poems. I feel like it's very fresh and different compared to all the other anthologies that I've been talking to you guys about already. And yeah, I just really enjoy it, and I do definitely need to finish this because obviously I want to finish all the rest of my poetry books. But anthologies too take a little bit longer to get through compared to collections. But that concludes all of my poetry anthologies that I currently own. So the next category in this video is going to be books about poetry writing, and I have a couple here that I'm going to talk to you guys about. And the first one is, it's kind of advice on writing, I guess. I'm going to put it in this category anyway, and that is Letters to a Young Poet by Rainier Maria Rilke, I think. That is how you say his name. I have mentioned this book quite a few times in videos, and I always think I butcher it every time. And this is a little black classics book. It's a Penguin one, and it's basically some letters to a young poet. I do enjoy it, do kind of recommend it. Didn't enjoy it as much as I originally did when I first started reading it, but still a great read, and it does have some good writer advice, I guess. The next book that I have is An Introduction to English Poetry by James Fenton. And I've only read a little bit of this because it is quite dense. Even though it is small, it is one of those books that you read little and often. I have not finished reading it. I think it is quite an old book. I think it was published quite a while ago. It was first published in 2002, I believe. So obviously it is a little bit older compared to some of the other books that I'm going to talk to you guys about on writing. But it is quite dense, and you have to read a little bit of it and then go away and think about it, which is why I haven't made much progress in it, because it really makes your brain work really hard to the point where it hurts. But I still really enjoyed what I have read of it so far, and I think it touches all different sorts of topics in it that are to do with poetry, and I think it also talks about different forms of poetry and poems, which is something that I'm not actually that familiar with. Generally, when I write poetry, I write it in free verse, but it covers all sorts of topics when it comes to poetry writing. And another writing book, and I haven't actually picked this one up yet because I just haven't, which is Getting into Poetry by Paul Hayland, a reader's and writer's guide to the poetry scene. This is a Blood Axe Poetry Handbook 1, and I think this is also an older poetry book. I think this was written a good couple of years ago. It was first written in 1992, and then this edition was published in 1996. So it is quite old, and I haven't really flipped through this properly. I just haven't looked through it because there have been other books that I've been prioritising. But again, this is another poetry book about writing. And the last two writing books that I have are by a poet who I think is absolutely wonderful, and I love both of these books very dearly. And the first book is the 52 Project, Write a Poem a Week, Start Now, Keep Going by Jo Bell. And Jo Bell is another UK poet, and both of these books are by her that I'm going to talk about now. This is basically a poetry prompt for once a week throughout that whole entire year for 52 weeks, and it gives you a prompt and an example for writing. And I did start this and then I didn't get very far, so I'm on the 9th one now, and I do really enjoy this. I think it's so interesting and handy, and writing is like a muscle, you have to work it, and I feel like this is a great way to kind of get into writing poetry on a more regular basis and becoming more familiar and to grow as a poet. It's just a really, really great book, especially if you are a beginner when it comes to writing poetry. And then my favourite book of this whole writing section is How to Be a Poet, a 21st Century Guide to Writing Well by Jo Bell and Jane Kamain. And I love this book with all of my heart. If you are a beginner, or even if you are more advanced and you want to get into reading more poetry and especially writing more poetry, then you definitely need to pick this book up. This covers so many topics. It covers from the act of how to read poetry and how to on listening. It covers poetic form, about different stages of drafting. And it also goes into subjects such as publishing, like how to get published, like the process of it and what you need to do to prepare for it, and just an insight into the publishing world of poetry in general. And it is very straightforward, there is no nonsense, they're very straight to the point and honest, and I love that about this book. As you might not be able to see, but I never highlight books, and I have highlighted this book, so be proud of me. And this is highlighted and underlined and annotated to the gods, and this is like my Bible when it comes to writing, so 100% recommend this if you are looking for more advice or just more of an insight when it comes to writing poetry, because this book is absolutely amazing. And the last section of this video is going to be about my poetry collections, and this spans across whole different sorts of poetry, from more traditional poets to more modern and contemporary poets, and I have quite a few, so we better get a move on. I'll talk about my slightly more traditional poet collections first, and the first one that I have is just a John Keats collection, which I bought a couple of months ago. Haven't read much of it, but this was my grandma's favourite poet, so I did want to get more of his poems so I can read about them, because since she loved them so much. And then another one that I have is a John Betjeman's collected poems. This was originally my grandma's, and it actually holds my favourite poem in here, which is called Hearts Together. I absolutely adore it to the world. I think I might read it to you now because I love it so much, and it just makes me smile every time I read it, and it's just so wonderful. And it goes, how emerald the chalky depths below the dancing ledge. We pulled the jellyfishes up and threw them in the hedge, that, with its stones and sea-pink tufts, ran to the high cliff edge. And lucky was the jellyfish that melted in the sun, and poured its vitals on the turf in self-effacing fun. Like us two in each other's arms, were seed and soul in one. My voice is going on this. O rationale, the happy bathe, an hour before our tea, when you were swimming breaststroke all along the rocking sea, and, in between the waves, explained the universe to me. The Dorset sun streamed on our limbs and scorched our hinder parts. We gazed into the pebble beach and so discussed the arts. O logical and happy we emancipated hearts. Love that. I love this poem mainly because it's just so quirky and I love it, and it's also set in Dorset, which is where my grandparents lived, so that is why this means so much to me, and obviously I need to read more of his poems in the future. Next I have two collections from Emily Dickinson. I have an Evertman's poetry collection of her poems, and I really wanted to start getting into her poets. Obviously she's so well known and I did really enjoy this. And when I was in America last year, I also picked up a Barnes & Noble edition of her poems, which is absolutely beautiful with some little gold foiling, and from what I have read of her work so far, I do really enjoy it. And also I have a little book of Lewis Carroll poems, which is called A Fractious Day, which is another one of these little black penguin classic books. I haven't read this yet, but it just has different poems from Alice in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass and The Hunting of the Snark, which I just think is a really nice way to kind of capture some of his poems in a little book like this. And I also have a collection of poems by Rummy, and this is a Penguin Classic collection. And Rummy is somebody who I've always read his poems online, especially like on Pinterest and Instagram, and then I got this for Christmas and I really adore his work from what I have read so far, especially what it says, a little poem on the back that says, "A lord of beauty enters the soul as a man walks into an orchard in spring." Like, that just sums up spring to me perfectly, and he is very philosophical and just absolutely wonderful, beautiful writing. So if you are looking for lovely, beautiful poetry writing, then I would definitely recommend this book. And now I have some poets that are kind of more like the modern Insta kind of poetry. And the first one is Milk and Honey by Rupi Kaur. And I recently reread this for the Reading Rush. I don't know when this video is going up, but I did reread it for the Reading Rush, and I did really enjoy my reread, actually a lot more than I thought I was going to. And obviously this sort of poetry, this sort of modern poetry, is a great place to start if you are a beginner, because some people are quite scared of poetry, so this is very easy and accessible and just great to understand. It's not hard to understand at all, which is great. And I also have Wild Embers by Nikita Gill, and this is my first Nikita Gill book, and she's also kind of classed as an Insta poet, and I do follow her on Instagram. I do enjoy her work. I didn't absolutely love this book, but there were definitely some poems that I really enjoyed, and I kind of loved the theme running throughout this book, which was kind of about feminism and fairy tales and all that sort of amazingness. And I also have, this is probably one of my favourite poetry collections, which is Every Word You Cannot Say by Ian S. Thomas. This is a book that captured my heart from the blurb. It felt like it was coming from my soul. It felt like this book was meant for me, and I really loved it. I don't love it quite as much as I thought I was going to, but I still really loved it. And it is also probably a really great book if you are a beginner when it comes to poetry. Next up, I have a poetry collection that I haven't actually read yet, and that is Skirrid Hill by Owen Shears. I believe that's how you say the title of the book. And I got this for my birthday or for Christmas, I think, a couple of years ago. And I haven't heard of Owen Shears apart from, obviously, one of my other anthologies is edited by him. And I don't really know what this is about. I feel like it is about war. I feel that's kind of the theme of it. Haven't read it yet, but I definitely need to get to it at some point. Next, I have Inside the Wave by Helen Dunmore. And I read this quite a while ago, so I probably need to reread it. And what I did remember, I did find it quite hard to understand, or if I did, I kind of had to be in the mood. But I feel like I have grown a lot as a poet and a reader of poetry since then, so I definitely need to reread this, and hopefully I will get more from it. Next up, I have one of my favourite poetry collections, which I definitely need to reread, and that is Sunshine by Melissa Lee Houghton. Melissa is a local poet. She is from the local town that I went to for university, and she is from Manchester, so I love that so much. And this book covers all sorts of topics such as abuse, addiction and mental health, and it is a very gritty, very real and raw book, and I absolutely adore it with all my heart, and the last poem gets me every time I read it, so this is one of my faves and you guys should definitely pick it up. Next, I have one of my other favourite poetry collections, which is Grain by John Glenday. And I actually picked this book up because I went to a poetry reading in Manchester last October, and he was one of the people reading their poetry, and he was the sort of person who, before I even spoke, I knew I was going to like his work, and I did. And I read this book, I read this so quickly, and I tabbed it, and I love it, and his work is just so wonderful. It reminds me of Mary Oliver a lot, who is also one of my favourite poets. So I love this to pieces, and I also 100% recommend this no matter your level of poetry reading. I think this is a great all-rounder for everybody. And another great all-rounder for reading poetry if you are a beginner or more advanced is Kate Tempest. And I have Hold Your Own and Running Upon the Wires by her. And Kate's work is amazing. I heard that she is an absolutely amazing spoken word poet as well. Personally, I haven't actually listened to any of her videos yet. I definitely need to. But her work is amazing. It's not too difficult to understand. It's not to that point where people get scared of poetry. I feel like a lot of people are scared of poetry because they feel like they won't understand it. But Kate's work is very easy to understand, and she does have a couple more books out as well as these, and I both really enjoyed them very much, so you definitely pick these up no matter, again, your level of poetry. I think you will definitely enjoy them. And then my last poet, one of my favourite poet of all time probably, it is last but definitely not least, is Mary Oliver. Mary Oliver is my favourite poet of all time. Her work just speaks to me. I cannot express how much I love it, and I intend to collect every book that she has ever had published. At the moment I have 1,000 Mornings, Blue Horses and Dog Songs, and I feel like at the moment my favourite is Blue Horses. And her work is just so wonderful. It is based around nature and animals and just the world and her simplicity of living, and I just love everything about her work. I cannot express. I feel like it speaks to me on so many levels, and it is also, again, I feel like, again, she's also a great poet whether you are a beginner to reading poetry or more advanced. I think she is great for all levels, and I just love her to pieces. God rest her soul. I think she passed away early this year, but I still will forever love her work, and it just means so much to me and does definitely inspire some of my own poetry writing. So I think we made it. I have no idea how long I have been filming, because this is probably the most books that I've ever talked about in one video, but I hope you guys really enjoyed this. I would definitely like to do more poetry videos in the future. I would love to do a beginner's guide. I don't feel like I'm quite qualified yet, because even though I really love poetry and I've been into it basically my whole life, but I've kind of got back into it over, say, the past 4 or 5 years maybe, I still don't feel like I'm at a stage where I can talk to you guys about that fully, but I would definitely love to do a favourites poetry collection and some beginners guide maybe at some point if you guys would like that, and any other poetry related videos that you guys would love me to film. But yeah, I really hope you guys enjoyed this video and enjoyed seeing all the poetry collections and other sorts of books that I have. I hope that if you are a budding poet, whether you are a reader or a writer, you have maybe found a book that you would like to pick up and read, or has a book that hopefully will find you some inspiration. And yeah, I'm really glad that I finally got around to filming this video. If you like this video, then please make sure to give it a thumbs up, and if you like to see more bookish videos from me, then make sure you hit that subscribe button and little bell icon so you will be noted every time I post a new video. As always, I will leave the links to my social media along with my Goodreads and my blog in the description down below for you guys. But thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!